All right, this is the second section in Alex's Intro to Windows 2012, Basic Lab Setup, Part 2. I'm Alex McDermott. So I've got a box. It's not a bad box, it's not a great box. It does run ESXi 5 point whatever version we're up to. I've downloaded VMware ESXi to an ISO. I got the 2012 ISO. I actually copied it up to the ESXi server, which I just installed by hitting next, 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 and putting in a password. We talked about what is a network. So there's a network could be from a specialist perspective, just an IP address scheme, stuff inside your firewall. It's a question of how you look at it. For lay people, you're talking about clients, servers, printing, file sharing, things like web access and other services along the lines of printing and file sharing. Microsoft Exchange, whether you get mail from somebody or not. And we have set up ESXi, and we configured a extra switch for it. And we said we're going to make our first three servers, Active Directory and DNS. We talked about Active Directory and DNS a little bit, and a little bit about IP addressing. And there's a minimum for servers. It's only suitable for a lab. And we installed our first server to be the Active Directory server. Now, if we go to the server, we'll see that there's this lovely warning over here on the front page. It's a lot of stuff here. If we click on it, we get that these services have delayed start. Now you could just select them and right click and say start services. And say OK. And this should go down. So let's talk about what's here. Server. Configure the local server. If you click here, it takes us to this section on the left of Server Manager, which we were in before to configure the server. And I think the server may not be particularly happy due to disk contention, which is only going to get worse as we go on. See, this machine's getting files ready for installation. So the computer name is DC11. There is no workgroup. And remote management is disabled. Remote desktops not turned on, I believe. There is no NIC teaming because this machine only has one NIC. We did statically assign the IP address. And Windows Update's never been run. Here's some information about the time zone. You can change this. Not really a big deal. Unless your server just happens to be really laggy. Not responding. You can also modify the time zone from down here by right-clicking. Probably I shouldn't have started those services. Oh well. Let's take a look at how our other install's going. not really, and I can hear my hard drive going off in the distance on the workstation. If you're wondering what I just did, I just hit pause on this workstation. Now, that's a really bad idea for some sorts of machines. And you'll see this thing is starting services, which is why it's being hugely slow. But that's life. And if we run down here, it no longer is complaining about services. So you notice the file and storage services are already installed on the machine by default. And it gives you a view of volumes, disks, and storage pools. The idea behind storage pools is that you might buy a server with a lot of slots for drives. And you might want to buy a lot of drives, and you're not sure what you want to get. Maybe you want to buy SSD drives, but they cost $2 a gig. We're talking enterprise drives, which might actually cost more. Or you don't know if you want to buy SATA drives, and you haven't figured out exactly what your use case is yet. So you only buy a few drives. You can create a storage pool using an empty drive or several. And as you decide you have the budget or the need, you'll buy more drives and push them in, and your storage pool can grow. In any case, there's this lovely add roles and features. And for the exam, or for running Windows Server on a network, you should really know what all of these roles and features are. You'll see you have two options to start with, which are role-based or feature-based installation and remote desktop services installation. And I'm not going to cover this except for a very brief example probably at the end. So let's go on, talk about this is our server. And we want Active Directory domain services, which says it's got the remote server administration tools for group policy management, directory services and lightweight directory services tools, module for PowerShell, more tools, Active Directory Administrative Center, which is the updated version of the administration of objects. So you'll see there's these other features like the DHCP server and the DNS server and Hyper-V, which you have to know for the exam, along with at least a bit of server update services and Windows deployment services. So let's go next, 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 install. Very difficult. While we're at it, let's go look at our other machine here, which we shut off. And now I'm going to power back on. Shall we say, not entirely recommended practice. Well, this one hasn't failed yet. Domain Controller 11. Maybe I should have called it GDC for GUI Domain Controller. And CDC for Core Domain Controller. Alright, let's take a time to look and see what we're doing. What comes after Active Directory, which is really just one server and one DNS server? Ah, IPv4 and IPv6. We must be talking about DHCP. So for server 1, we did a GUI install, not a core. We gave it the name DC11. We gave it an IP address, a subnet mask, and a gateway. Now, some of you might have experience and might be looking at me and saying, DC11, that's stupid. And you're right. And there are a lot of conflicting views on name schemes. I'm just trying to make it pretty easy for purposes of a demo. Server 2 is going to be our DHCP server, which is going to be 12 with an IP address of 10.0.0.12. And for DNS, it's going to point at DC11. We're going to start by installing the DHCP role. After that, we're going to add Windows Deployment Services. And we'll probably do this remotely from Server Manager and add a boot image and an install image. And then we're going to install Network Address Translation Box, otherwise known as Routing and Remote Access, which has been around for years, except for Windows 2012 now has a better version of the direct access feature that was introduced in one of the Windows 2008 versions. You no longer have to have 2 consecutive IP addresses, but you still have to be using IPv6. But RAS also supports VPN, but that's a little outside of the domain of what's going on. All right, DC11. Apparently I can change the time zone now. Nice. I'm on the East Coast. Let's change this to Eastern Time. Okay. Okay. This one I can cancel. And we're still waiting for this to run through. I'm suspending that virtual machine again because it's just annoying me that it's taking so long to run. I don't think you want to have to sit there and wait for everything else to go, so I'm going to get that up and running before I get to that as a video. You'll see that on our DC11 server that it's installed the Active Directory Domain Services role plus all of the features that go with it in role administration. But we are still not a domain controller because we haven't run the modern equivalent of DC Promo. You'll see up here in this flag there's 2 things. One is that we've added the role, and the other is that we need to promote the domain controller to actually be a domain controller. So there's some options here. Add a domain controller to an existing domain. Don't have that. Existing forest, we don't have that. So let's add a new forest and call it, what do I call the network? Lab.internal. There used to be a feature of calling this calling things .local. And Max, for some reason, didn't like that. I don't remember what the reason was, but there's now .internal that can be used, because I believe Max didn't like it and got powerful enough to cause issues with people complaining about it. You'll notice there's a forest functional level that you can set, and a domain functional level, which can be anything equal or above the forest functional level. And when we changed the forest functional level to 2012, it took the server level back up with it. We're going to make this a DNS server because we don't have DNS. I could have installed DNS separately and then done this checkbox as well. And this is a global catalog server, where global catalog is a listing of sort of the index of the Active Directory databases for all the domains in a forest. So you might be in a group and in some other domain and you want to log on here, and this will get you information about where you need to go for verification of things, and makes many things work better. You've got this warning message, and you see that you can hover above it. We don't have a DNS domain, so we're not going to worry about that. NetBIOS is one of these fun things that you absolutely positively must know about unless you're really, really lucky. We're talking about a 25-year-old networking technology that broadcasts by and large to its entire network. Or you can get a Win server, which is sort of like DNS for NetBIOS. If you're lucky, you don't have NetBIOS. If you're not lucky, you're going to have to deal with single label namespaces in DNS. So a lot of organizations say you have to change where the database folder is for the Active Directory database, where the log files folder is, and where the sysvol folder is. It can be argued that's security by obscurity, but you're going to lose if you make that. Also note this view script feature. Anything you're doing in Server Manager is a PowerShell commandlet. And you can usually click the button to show you what's happened. Now, this is going to run the prerequisite for doing the DC promotion, and it's going to tell you all the warnings. If you have it as a Windows 2012 domain controller, it's a default setting that doesn't allow Windows NT 4.0. Well, Windows NT 4.0 came out in, what, 1998? So it's 14, 15 years old. Delegation for the DNS server can't be created because there is no parent or installing it on this server. So there's some warnings, things you might want to pay attention to. And you can see as it's starting this, it's going through. So I'm going to pause this video and come back for the next portion of it, which I think is part 3, and get the DHCP server up and running before, or rather get the operating system installed on the DHCP server before I come back. And I'll just leave this at the finished installation screen.